So welcome again to Building Safety Faces. I'm talking today to Deepa Mistry. So welcome, Deepa. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you, Matt.
So Deepa, can you just give us a run through of how you ended up in the cladding scandal, the building safety crisis, just a synopsis of your circumstances and where you find yourself today and how long you've been at this?
Sure. In summary, we had our cladding ripped off and remediated pretty much after Grenfell. I believe we were one of the first buildings in the Peabody estate to have been remediated this quickly. And after that point, we assumed everything was fine and there would be no issues for us to move onwards, want to sell, remortgage, etc. It was only in February of 2020 when my husband and I started the resales process with Peabody that we then received a letter from them to say, by the way, you need to be aware you may not be able to sell, or your sale may be stopped because a buyer may be refused a mortgage. Looking into it a little bit more, realizing that the letter was a blanket letter may not necessarily apply to us having been remediated. So looked into it a bit more, pushed a bit more, and realized we don't have an EWS. And I'm still pushing for that today. And we're now a year on from that point and still don't have an EWS. However, only recently it's come to light that the reason we may not have an EWS is because an inspection was recently done where the cladding may have some quality issues. So although we know exactly what material was replaced onto the building, for some reason there has now been quality issues raised and I have no more detail. I pushed and I can't get any more information from the building safety team, the leasehold team, the defects team. I don't really know where to go right now, and we've just been told to wait.
So we're seeing this worryingly all over the country with blocks that you would think that remediation projects have happened, as you've just said, and we're okay, and then you start to look at I'm thinking of one in Manchester that finished last May, millions of pounds worth that was spent that can't get the tick to say that the building's safe and it's mortgageable, and you start to think that might have been a one-off, and then talk to you and you start seeing this growing picture of effectively failed or questionable remediation projects, and you think, well, what on earth is going on here? This is
it doesn't make sense to me, because all along the project we had been speaking to the contractors, we'd been speaking to Peabody, and we were assured that inspections were being done by a proper inspection company, MLM Group, I believe they're called. So every few pieces of cladding that they were putting on, it was being inspected. And therefore there was certification and sign off at the end of the project when it was completed. So why now something is being raised, I don't understand. I don't see how it was fine a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, sorry, but now all of a sudden is not. It feels like I've gone from being in a safe building up to 2017. Bear in mind, I bought in 2010. And then it was unsafe up until 2018. And in 2018, it was safe again. And now 2021, we're back to being unsafe. It's just ridiculous. I mean,
so with the proximity then to Grenfell, so was your building ACM clad?
It was ACM, and it had an unidentified insulation product on. It wasn't even what was on plan. So
obviously in the very first wave of response to Grenfell, it was quick, find everything with ACM, get the ACM off, get it replaced.
It was literally 6 or 7 weeks after Grenfell and the work had started.
So potentially in the rush to remove the ACM and replace it, then potentially there could be issues with, one, the planning of that project, and secondly, what materials were then specified to go back on, because everybody's eye was on ACM at that moment as opposed to other materials.
I see what you're getting to, but the cladding and insulation wasn't replaced immediately. We were sitting here through the winter months with a building which had no cladding, no insulation, and no membrane on for about 5 months. And at the same time, we had a waking watch in place. the reason for that is that Peabody couldn't decide what material was going to be replaced on it. And at the time they cited that they were waiting on government guidance. They ended up deciding not to wait any longer because it was such a long time that we had nothing on the building, and went for the best of the best. So we had a Luca bond put on, we had rock wall insulation, and we had power lawn membrane. It was the best of the best, and the combination was as non-combustible as can be, is what I was assured. So I failed to see how what's on now could be a problem. I don't know whether it could be a structural thing, and there were definitely fire breaks, horizontal and vertical. That was done. We had a fire alarm system, a new smoke alarm system. Everything was included. Our fire doors replaced. There was so much work done that it's just surprising that this could now be an issue. And the only thing that I can think of that it could be, and this is me speculating, is the parts of the building that were brick, which weren't replaced. So although the brick is not flammable, the insulation behind it, perhaps if it was the same unbranded stuff that we had on the cladded side, then that could be a problem. Though I failed to see again how, if you've got insulation and brick, how that can become a fire hazard.
Yeah.
But I'm a resident and I'm not a fire safety expert.
It sort of smacks of, and there's so many things to unpack there as we sort of hear your story deeper, and without going into the technicals at the moment because we need to look at a lot of detail. But just from a human perspective, I mean, I think there's a lot of people that are heading towards remediation projects, and putting aside how they're funded, but what's it like living in a building that's effectively had its face taken off through the, because a lot of people are going to have to go through having a cladding system taken off and replaced, and what's day to day, what does that do to you? What was life like through that? Okay, it was a longer period than it should have been, but what was that experience like of living through a remediation project?
It was, I'd say it was stressful because I'm on the 6th floor, so I'm not used to having anybody walking across my windows or my balcony. So I had scaffolding up where somebody could walk straight onto my balcony at any moment. I had people walking across all of my windows. I had 2 young children at that point and was heavily pregnant and was also nursing my younger son. So there wasn't a lot of privacy. And every room we were in, I had to make sure that the children were always appropriately dressed, and that we had some level of privacy by keeping all the windows closed and the blinds shut and the curtains shut. It was a bit hard as well because with all the noise around us, and then tools just left randomly on scaffolding that the children could reach because they could reach it from the balcony. There was dust everywhere. So even after they'd left in the evening, I then had to go around and sweep down all the dust. And the dust was particles of cladding. So it was metal filings, and it was very, very small. That if you leave your windows open, it's going to come into your home. So I had to go around, bear in mind I was heavily pregnant, and sweep everything down, sweep my windowsills down, wipe everything down, because I don't want that coming into my home. I don't want my children breathing it in. So keeping windows open, ventilation was a problem. The safety of it was a problem. And I believe that there are attempts on the ground level of people trying to climb up the scaffolding. So security would have been an issue as well. And the Waking Watch who are in the stairwell wouldn't have a clue if somebody was climbing up our scaffolding, getting onto our balconies and trying to access our home. So it was a bit of a worry in that sense. Other than that, we just got used to it and thought, well, this is how it is. And once it's done, it's done. And we just kept praying for it to be over and done with very, very quickly. When it was finally done, we did breathe a sigh of relief and we felt, okay, fine, we're now in a safe building and we've got that assurance that the children will be safe, we will be safe. However, that hasn't stopped my husband and I taking our own precautions. We've actually put harnesses on the balcony in case we need to abseil down and escape, just in case.
So it takes its toll, and and I think this is a point that we need to get across and sort of share and understand it. And so from a lifestyle perspective, now that you're sort of in this limbo of waiting for EWS1, waiting for a definitive answer to say that the building is safe, what impact is that having on you and your neighbours? I mean, is it mainly a financial impact in terms of not being able to move on and be comfortable in your home, or is it actually having a direct sort of financial impact on a monthly basis in terms of contributing to additional insurance costs or whatever they are?
Well, at the moment, our service charges are not inclusive of any of these costs. We were told back then when the work was done that we wouldn't be paying for it, including the waking watches. So that's a relief to us. However, that doesn't mean that if building safety bill is passed, we won't be charged for historical work. It doesn't mean that if new work is found that needs to be done, we will then not be charged for it. We just don't know. So at this stage, we're sitting on our hands and waiting for a bill to drop through the door and hit us. But none of us have that kind of money. We're all, well, majority of us are shared owners. There are some people renting here, but we are all financially vulnerable. There are none of us who have, bags of money sitting in the bank, because if we did, we'd have bought these properties outright and we would have moved on by now. Of the 20 flats in this building, I know that there are maybe 2 or 3 families who want to sell up and move on. They're in similar situations to me, where I've got 2 rooms and I've got 3 children, and there's just not enough space. And a whole year of COVID has been clear that, homeschooling and living, breathing, everything, doing everything in this small space, it's not really helpful to our mental health.
And that's the natural order of things with flats, really, for a lot of people, isn't it? Is that you have them for a while they suit you, you then trade on and you move to something bigger, and then maybe at the other end you move back into one, and but we've got this sand in the wheels now of not being able to move, and I think that the implications on individuals but also on the market is huge.
I can't move anywhere. I mean, I was 2 years ago, I thought, fine, the cladding's been done. We can then move on and sell it whenever we need to. So when the time came and we needed to move on, we're now blocked. I can't move. We don't know what to do. The only solution that we've been given, which is ultimately a last resort, because I do not want to do this, is to become a landlord and sublet. Now, we have been given permission by Peabody to do this, but I don't want to be a landlord. I want to release the money and all the investment that I've put into this property and move on and put that towards my next home for my family. And if I'm subletting, it means that my money's tied up.
Yeah.
I haven't got anything to put to a new home. So I might be subletting this place, but I'll also be renting somewhere else until I can sell. It's a waste of money. And then there is the aspect of, the capital gains tax when I do eventually sell, because I've been subletting, but I've been forced to sublet. So how is this even fair?
Yeah, it's not. And just one question I'd like to ask you around transparency, and you may have seen things that we posted around what Dame Judith Hackett said after the Grenfell fire in the report around safety should not be something that's done to others, and there needs to be a new culture of transparency between building managers and residents. And really, I think statements that I think a lot of people would agree with and would just nod their heads and say, well, I can't believe that isn't happening now, but if it's not, it definitely needs to happen. And in the context of this being something that she published in May 2018, question really for you is, from your perspective, how do you think that's going?
Transparency of information-wise, I struggle to get things from Peabody. And on many occasions, I'm either directed from one department to another, who then say, I don't know, I'll get back to you, and you never hear back. I have to chase for the smallest amount of information. For example, I asked a few days ago for the details of my sinking fund and my contributions to it, because I was a little worried that it had been accessed without permission to pay for, say, some remediation work. And, I just wanted some comfort that it hadn't been. But it took weeks to get that data, because every time I got something, it was the wrong thing. And it wasn't that I was asking for something difficult. Even asking for the safety data sheets within our O&M manual, we've been told we don't provide those to leaseholders. But why not? These materials are on the building that I'm living in, and I have every right to see them. The FRA, it took weeks for me to get hold of that. And that was after quite a bit of pushing, but I did eventually get hold of it. And I suppose that alludes a little bit to the reason why we can't get an EWS at the moment. So it's difficult to get information from our housing association at the best of times. But when you do find somebody who is willing to help you, they will do what they can to help you. But it's finding that person who cares enough to go the extra mile.
I think you've got within the housing associations, they manage so many properties typically, and aren't awash with resources, and they're on their side facing a tsunami of resident inquiries, regulatory changes, etc. And I think really the point of collision in the middle should be, here is this information that we have, and we'll share it with you. We'll be transparent with you. We'll also be transparent about when we can't answer a question because we don't have the information. Historically, we didn't do this. We missed it. We're going to put it right, and it's going to take us a while to put it right. But let's just be open about it and say that we all want the same thing.
If they weren't able to provide something, then I'd rather just hear that, I'm sorry, we don't have it, or we haven't been keeping tabs of it. It's as simple as that. Then I'll be upset. But at least I'm not going to spend my next few weeks trying to chase it. It's just a waste of time. Just be honest with me. I do feel, though, with Peabody have taken over Mosaic a couple of years ago, and their estate has doubled in size, and then they lost staff. And those that are left to do the work of twice the number of buildings is just a little bit unfair. So I do see that they're pushed as well. The staff are pushed. They are trying to do their very best, but it's a trickle-down effect. If you decrease the number of staff and you increase the amount of work, something's going to get missed. I do believe also that their systems are not updated. I think that's probably half the reason that accounts information is not always easy to get to. I'm still waiting for my annual service charge statement for 1920 after chasing from September 2020, and have been told several times, oh, it will be with you in a couple of weeks. Oh, it's just being printed, and there's nothing. But this also adds to my fear that we're going to be left with a big bill.
It's I think for people that maybe are looking into this from outside this sort of experience, and sort of if I contrast the work that we've done and I've done in financially regulated firms, so FCA regulated firms, where they're dealing with client money, the rules are so unbelievably strict for client money management that everything has to reconcile every month across every bank statement, relate back to terms of business agreements, all has to line up and goes through a very short audit window at the end of every year with an external auditor to sign off on that client money to be returned to the Financial Conduct Authority. So if you look at those rules and then you contrast that to, as a consumer, it may be that you're paying £50 or £100 to an insurance broker for an insurance policy, but your money has got that level of client protection around it. Whereas in property, you could be paying a £5,000 service charge bill into effectively a black hole with no real governance around it. And that, I think, people outside of this world, I think, would probably find quite shocking that there is very little protection there. And you're asking the question of a historical, how did you spend my money last year?
Yes.
For whatever reason,
it's
you can't.
Something that I shouldn't be asking. That information should be provided. Yet time and time again, I've had to ask for invoices. I've had to ask for more detail. Well, why am I paying extra money? Why are you asking for more? Why have you not got their estimations correct? I mean, it's not as though the building changes an awful lot from one year to another. What exactly is it that you're now asking me to pay an extra, say, £200, £300 within 28 days? And it's kind of money I don't have. But that sort of scrutiny is not done by the accounts teams. They're not looking at it at that level. I think it's seen as well, it's got to be paid. People will pay it through the service charges and not question it. And sometimes when we have questioned and we have persisted, there has been investigation done and found that they charged us incorrectly for whatever reason, whether they were charged incorrectly or whether they didn't apportion it right or they didn't look or scrutinize, whatever reason, then we have received a credit back. But that requires me to do their job, and I shouldn't be doing that. I should know that it's right first time. And I'm an accountant, so in my job, and I have worked in charities where I've had to do this every single month, where I've had to answer to audit. I've had to do this in banks. I've done similar roles where I have had to answer to the external auditors. And I have to show proof that I have reconciled every single month. If I don't, then that's a problem for me. But why is this not being done in a charitable organization, which is for people?
I think it's probably, without speaking about specific organizations, I mean, I think you have to look back to the regulatory environment in the same way that there is no real check and balance to say that, for example, life-saving or life-preserving equipment within your building or any other building is being properly maintained or certified. There are codes for doing that, but there's no real audit of completeness or quality. Even a fire risk assessment will not really take account of this properly because it's just an assessment at the time. It's a very quick, simple, it's not regulatory assurance, it's not audit standard information for critical systems. So I think there's just I would look at the culture and say there is across the industry, average or below average performance is consistent and acceptable, or has been allowed to be accepted by the system. And then hence we roll all of that up for 20, 30 years and we end up with a Grenfell and we end up with a building safety crisis. I think to my mind, there's no real other way of explaining it other than we just haven't cared enough for decades. And we've ended up with this huge problem that is seemingly so huge, and every rock you turn, you'll find a problem, and one problem leads to three more. And we've seen that with EWS1 and funding and legislation. And every time somebody tries to fix a problem, they create three more.
Yes. Pandora's box.
Yeah, and I mentioned something on an interview the other day, and I said, really, what we've got to start with is, from a government perspective, is contrition, to say we are a huge part of the problem and we will lead on the solution. But lots of people helped us create the problem and we need lots of people to help us solve the problem.
Yes.
But the government's so insular, they don't want to talk to people. They don't have to talk to me, but they don't want to. And I think we need to be crowdsourcing as many ideas as possible. Some of them are going to be pie in the sky, some of them are going to be really good, and we need to be fast tracking good ideas to solve these problems. We need bright people contributing in all different areas. And I would say at the top of the list of people we should be listening to are the residents in the buildings, because you guys have the lived experience. You know what it's like. You can see what's going wrong in front of you. If you're told in a non-patronizing way what that red thing on the wall down the corridor is and what it does and how it keeps your family safe, you'll be the first people to report it if somebody smashes it off the wall or it's not working.
Absolutely.
But if you don't know what that thing is, no one's ever told you, you'll walk on by because you won't be aware. So,
and not just that, but there's a lot of apathy where people believe, well, it's not my job and it's not my responsibility, and that shouldn't be the case. if we are told that this is an important thing, we take responsibility for it as well.
Yeah, and there will always be
that happens in my block.
Yeah, you and your neighbours can look after your block. You can report things, but you can't go and reclad the building. You've got to trust in others to do that. But you can certainly make sure it's maintained properly. And I think if you had a document that said these 12 things have been done in the last month, and you could look and say they haven't, you would spot if effectively that was a list of things being done in another building and a mistake had been made. Whereas if you're just managing that from an office, you wouldn't necessarily know that somebody's put the wrong name on the document.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
We need those checks and balances in place.
When I'd say pre-Grenfell, we used to have monthly checks and monthly walk rounds with neighbourhood managers, and you were invited to walk around with them. But in actual fact, you didn't know half the time what day they were coming, what time they would be there. And the odd time that I did catch a neighbourhood manager around to do a walk around with, they didn't do an awful lot, and they didn't have a checklist of I need to see this, this and this. So it does need to be, it trickles down from the top. If it's made an important thing to do, then it will be done. If it's made, a requirement, it should be done. And, site visits should be done on a regular basis.
If the research tells us on a car that tyres have to be a minimum tread depth to be safe, we know what that number is, and then we have a way of checking that number. Whether you go to Quick Fit, whether you go to take the car for an MOT, and they'll say, sorry, you need new tyres, or your tyres are okay. And we write the answer to that question down, and if it's an MOT, it goes on the sheet, and it says the tread depth for that tyre at the time of the MOT was this, and that gets stored. That's a record. That's a car. If we're talking about an essential fire safety system in a block of flats that houses 100 families, I would like to think that we would have a far higher bar of compliance on the flat with 100 families than we do potentially on a tyre on a car that gets used once every now and then. But we have the opposite.
The regulations are greater on, say, the smaller consumer items than they are on the home you live in.
Yeah, and somebody said the other day, I can't remember what news outlet it was in, that I get more protection when I buy a toaster than I do when I buy a flat.
Yes,
and I think that really encapsulates where we are at the moment. But we've got to hopefully fix that problem. But at the moment, we've got the clear and present problem, which is people like yourself that start not being able to move, other people that are just about to have the wall ripped off the building, other people that don't even know they've got a problem yet. That's about to hit them. As I mentioned before we started, I talked to somebody the other day that only found out a couple of months ago that their building had a problem. They thought they had a clean bill of health up until that point.
It's a huge mess. It's a really, really big mess. But I'm surprised as well that, I think I read somewhere that the government don't agree with some of the figures and the estimates of buildings that have been put out there either. And I don't feel that there is enough of a register to understand this and how big this problem is. The scale of it is massive. We know that, but what we don't know is the actual numbers, and we need that data. It's only with that data you can then start to see what needs to be done, where it needs to be done first, and how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, I would agree that the data is not there, and
that's a worrying problem. If I would expect, if the government didn't know that, they'd be out there getting hold of that data as soon as possible, because that is the first way to tackle a problem with information. And it's disappointing and a little bit scary that hasn't been done yet. In any other company, that's exactly what you'd be doing.
Yeah. How big is the problem? What do we need to tackle it? How long is it going to take? I mean, to boil that down, I asked the other day for the project plan. Sort of said, well, knowing full well that if I know there are 20,000 buildings to be remediated, put them on, list them, project plan. How many can we do in any given week or month or year? What resources do we need? Classic project planning. But if you don't know how many rows there are in the, how many projects to go on your project plan, or what the milestones are, you can't populate the plan and you can't put a price on it.
No, exactly. And how can the government then say that 1.6 billion is enough to cover it if they don't know how much there is to cover?
Yeah, it's all on estimates. I think we all know the answer to that question, that it was never going to be enough.
I did a comparative of the proposals. So I had a look at Michael Wade's proposal and I had a look at the LKP proposal, and I'm a little bit astounded that Michael Wade hasn't come up with something like the LKP proposal. But on the APPG, I understood that his view was we just need something simple, and that's it. And the easiest way to do it is to hit the leaseholder, which is.
So we don't know, what we don't know is the terms of engagement that he was given, that, you know, and how prescriptive that was. If it was, Michael, you need to create a solution that does not include levies on construction firms, government contribution, etc., and works within the framework of existing leasehold law, that leads you down a very narrow path of finding a way to charge leaseholders, or, you know, get liquidity into the system. And it's still, even if you were to take Michael Wade's solution, I'm still not sure yet that what level of commitment do they have from lenders that they would be willing to put the money into this system, even if it was to be accepted, because is that theoretical or actual? I could see a potential for huge levels of default on those loans if they were to be made. And
I agree.
What bank is going to want to lend?
Are these loans going to be made to the freeholders, which I heard recently, and then get passed down through service charges? Or are they going directly to the leaseholder? In which case, do we have first refusal? Do we have the option to say, no, I'm not taking it? And then what happens from that point?
Yeah. And I think then
no, they have to look at a different solution. But if we are backed into a corner, like I am with subletting, because I have no other choice, then we're basically left with a second mortgage, and it's unfair and it's wrong. And we've been told that, you know, then you can take it down the legal route to try and recoup that money back. However, when an individual tries to take the legal option, there's more chance that they will fail. If the government tries to do it, there's more chance, there's more power to them. So it feels that everything is very one-sided, and that there's no motivation to accept responsibility. There's no consequence seen for the problems of the last 20, 30, 40 odd years in building. And the big builders, the developers, the manufacturers are all being rewarded for what is bad practice, because it's okay. The little people will pay for it. And that's just wrong.
Well, the circle to be squared, or the square to be circled, you know, circle to be squared, is one that we still need new homes. So that's a very potent force to carry on building. The only way we can build at the right quantity, nearly said quality there, the right quantity, is by keeping the large developers on side and keep them building. But that may well not be supportive of then fining them, taxing them, levying them, taking them to court over their historical failings. And I think the other issue that we've got is that in every building I've seen, I've never seen one where you could say all the problems with this building are the fault of company X or person Y. It's multiple layers of failings, including the regulatory failings. So therefore, if you were to look like the Australians do and say £1 million is needed to fix this building, the government have put forward the £1 million or the $1 million, and then the arbitration says these people will pay at this amount towards that cost. And if, for example, architect B was deemed to be 3% of the problem, architect B would need to pay 3% of the million, or their insurers would. And but you do that in slow time once people are safe. You don't have that conversation before making people safe. So I think the phasing issue, as I see it, the only way that we can phase this properly is that government need to find some money, significant amounts of money. And even if they sell that to the public as this is a forward funding that we fully aim to recover from guilty parties down the line, so it's a loan as opposed to or a grant as opposed to a giveaway, if you like, Whether they've already said in their own impact assessments that the likelihood of leaseholders being able to recover meaningful amounts of money from the supply chain that built their buildings is, I think they use the term unjustifiable financially or something like that, i.e. you will be spending £1 to get 20 pence back.
Exactly, and you'll pay all the fees as well.
Yeah, so unless you're going to get full cost recovery, you've wasted your time and your money. So that's what we've got to get to. And whenever I try and speak to people in government, I say that, but I think they know it. They just can't or won't do anything about it.
Well, they're the ones who are empowered to make the changes. And I've been looking at this from an economical perspective, from an accountant's perspective, from a bankruptcy perspective. The more people that are made bankrupt, the more homes that have been repossessed, the more homes that go back into social housing stock, because ultimately the government will buy them back very cheaply. And yes, they'll have to pay the cost to remediate them to make them safe again, but they'll have saved some money. So you'll increase the amount of social housing stock, but you'll also increase the pressure on social housing, on universal credit. And we'll be in that position for a very, very, very long time. Because, for example, me as an accountant, if I declare myself bankrupt, I lose my license to practice. So my chances of continuing my career and paying into the government and contributing through taxes are nil. I will be claiming for years and years to come. So it's not just one or two people. This is going to happen in mass.
And I'm not sure that having asked the question but not got an answer, I think is revealing. But having asked the question of what is the economic impact assessment of this that the Treasury, I hope, have done, maybe they haven't, in terms of what you describe, in terms of that transfer of responsibility onto the welfare state from private individuals. So, i.e., what is the counterbalancing positive effect of paying some money now to keep people in their homes and keep them in their jobs, as opposed to pushing them through bankruptcy and homelessness and then picking up the bill for, as you said, for years through the welfare state. So if you look at it in the round, the money might come from a different pocket, but this isn't just a Ministry of Housing building safety issue. This is a societal issue.
Exactly. It is something that the Treasury and the Chancellor needs to look at. And they've got the intelligent people working for them. They must have modeled this. They've got to have some kind of idea what this will do. If they're modeling what happens in a time of COVID, in pandemic times, they've got to be able to see what happens when people default on their payments, on their homes, lose their homes, and now are reliant on the state, and will be reliant on the state long term. It's not going to help the recession. It's not going to help the economy. It's only going to make things worse. And the Great Britain will no longer be great. Is that really the legacy that the Tories really want to be leaving? I don't think so.
I think you're very gracious in terms of the forethought that you ascribe to the government and the Treasury. I mean, I would like to think that those sorts of things are being done, but when I've asked questions to very senior people about, for example, in council, local councils, where you ask the question that they're responsible for that social housing capacity in their area, when you ask them what's on your risk register at the moment, what are you worried about, what are you planning for in terms of an uptick or a downturn in social housing requirements, the answer that has come back is the impact of COVID on repossessions of private rental properties. So people that are in private rental properties got behind with their rent. At the moment, there's an eviction ban. When that eviction ban comes off, then landlords will come back in and evict. And then count that. So they're worried about that. When you ask them the question about the building safety crisis and potential for forfeiture and repossession and et cetera, like we saw with Hayley recently, they look at you blankly as though, well, that's not something we're thinking about. So if they're not thinking about it and they're not modelling it and they're close to the ground, who in Treasury is spending time worrying about this? So
are they really going to wait until this explodes and becomes a massive crisis? I mean, it already is a massive crisis, but the more people that start losing their homes, and believe me, I've seen the trends. I've been looking at repossessions, I've been looking at auction houses, and I can see that there are more and more modern built flats on there because people simply cannot afford to pay the bills on them. So, and that's just over the last 4 or 5 months. Imagine what will happen over the next 12 months. Imagine the position we're going to be in. You might have vaccines out there to get people back into the economy, but you're not going to have people back into the economy because they simply don't have anywhere to live, have lost their careers, and are reliant on you. It's nonsensical. And if it hasn't been looked at, then I'm really angry. Why hasn't it been looked at? I'm putting a lot of faith into the fact that they have the most intelligent people looking at this. In, was it Stephen Greenhalgh's words, the brightest and the best minds? I'm yet to see.
Yeah, I think that was qualified by the brightest and best minds in government. So if there are even brighter and better minds outside of government, they're not included. So I think where I'm looking at this now, having what I've learned with working with these organisations for the last number of years, is the assumption is the mother of all cock-ups, or whatever, that assuming that people are diligent or doing a good job or intelligent or whatever it is, and unless you've seen the evidence with your own eyes that they are doing it, assume that they're not. Because where is the impact assessment, the countervailing impact assessment? The Treasury look at this and say, Deepa, Matt, you're worrying about nothing. We've done the analysis and it's £5,000. You know, it's all upside. It's all wonderful. There is not going to be this cataclysmic run on the bank, run on the social housing stock that you guys are predicting. You're worrying about nothing. It's just you two. So where's that evidence? Where's the model?
There isn't. It's not there.
If that hasn't been put forward,
if the maybe there is. It, I've done that work. They can come to me.
Yeah.
I've got data there, but at least it's a starting point for them. Just.
I mean, there could well be an analysis, but the analysis is so terrible that again they don't release it. So I don't know. I don't have that inside knowledge. I wish I did, but I haven't seen it.
You know, I've been listening and reading to a lot of the feedback and comments from, you know, all the campaigns out there and just the general public, because the general public are so blissfully unaware of the extent of the problem that they believe that as a taxpayer they shouldn't be paying for this. And I agree, as a taxpayer I wouldn't want to be paying for it either. However, the solution has been put forward where the taxpayer's contribution is nothing. So it's such a simple thing to do. Why not just go off and do it? It keeps everybody happy. Yes, there is going to be a little bit of, say, reputational damage for manufacturers, developers, the government even, but they'll bounce back. They always do. If we are burdened as a leaseholder with these costs, we won't bounce back. And that is the only thing that can be said. We will not bounce back. We will suffer mentally, physically, for the rest of our lives. I see it, and it's just not right. It needs to be put right, and this is not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to get the accountable people actually held accountable.